The stranger in the throne hall. The great doors of the Altherian throne hall groaned open, revealing a shimmering cascade of light that danced across polished emerald floors and towering crystalline pillars. Ethan Cade, Earth's first ambassador to the galactic powers, stepped inside. His tailored diplomatic suit clung tightly to his shoulders, a feeble shield against the imposing grandeur before him. Floating orbs of light hovered in the air, casting a soft glow over the assembly of Altherian nobles, their elongated forms adorned with flowing garments that seemed to ripple like liquid starlight. Ethan had read countless reports about the Altherians, brilliant strategists with an unyielding devotion to order, but none of them prepared him for the sheer scale of their presence. At nearly twice his height, their opalescent skin shimmered faintly, and their multifaceted eyes fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He was an anomaly, a creature from a small, war-torn planet now standing at the epicenter of a galaxy that barely acknowledged humanity's existence. At the far end of the hall, Queen Ilyara rose from her crystalline throne. Her 6 eyes, each a different hue of the Altherian spectrum, focused intently on him. Her presence was a force unto itself, her gown woven with threads that seemed to hum faintly, alive with energy. A crown of glowing crystals floated above her head, casting prismatic patterns on the high ceilings. The room fell silent as her voice resonated, deep and melodic. Ethan Cade of Earth, she began, her gaze sharp yet unreadable. You stand before the Altherian throne, a representative of your kind. Speak your purpose. Ethan took a steady breath. This moment was rehearsed endlessly in Earth's halls of power, but now, under the Queen's piercing gaze, it felt wholly uncharted. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect Earth's advisors believed would resonate. Your Majesty, he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. I come not just as an emissary of Earth but as a seeker of hope. Humanity faces extinction at the hands of the Krell. We seek an alliance with the Altherian Empire. Together, I believe, we can defeat them and ensure the survival of both our peoples. The nobles whispered among themselves, their alien voices blending into a low hum of skepticism. The Krell, a warlike species with no mercy or regard for life, had already razed dozens of planets. To them, Earth was a weakling, and its people were insignificant. Queen Ilyara raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. A bold claim for a species so new to the stars, she said, her tone neutral. Your kind is untested, your strategies unconventional. Why should the Altherian Empire risk its resources for such an alliance? Ethan straightened, his calm demeanor unwavering. Because humans adapt, Your Majesty. Where others see chaos, we find opportunity. It is through our unpredictability that we have survived. I believe it is through that same chaos that we can prevail against the Krell. The Queen's gaze lingered on him for a long moment before she nodded, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. We shall see. The handmaiden's rivalry begins. After the audience, Ethan was escorted to his quarters by 5 of the Queen's personal attendants. The Altherian handmaidens moved gracefully, their robes flowing as if caught in an unseen current. Each bore an air of quiet elegance, but their curiosity about the human was anything but subtle. Araya, the tallest and boldest of the group, broke the silence. You are smaller than I expected, she said, tilting her head as if trying to solve a puzzle. Delicate, even, added Lisha, her voice softer but tinged with intrigue. She reached out, her slender fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of Ethan's sleeve. And warm. Ethan chuckled, used to being underestimated. Humans may be small, but we make up for it in other ways. The comment earned a series of raised brows from the handmaidens, their expressions unreadable. Araya smirked. We shall see, Ambassador. The tour ended at the door to his chambers, where the rivalry began to take shape. As Ethan thanked them and turned to enter, Araya stepped forward. Ambassador Cade, she said, her voice suddenly formal. As part of our duty to honored guests, we are to ensure your comfort. If there is anything you require, you need only ask. Lisha's eyes narrowed. I am better suited to such tasks. My knowledge of human customs surpasses yours, Araya. Knowledge means little without experience, Araya shot back, her calm veneer cracking. The tension between the two was palpable. Ethan, caught in the crossfire, raised his hands. Ladies, I appreciate the hospitality, but I think I'll be fine on my own. Both handmaidens exchanged a glance but said nothing further. Ethan closed the door behind him, leaning against it with a sigh. Day 1, he muttered to himself, and I'm already part of an alien soap opera. A new chapter for humanity. As Ethan prepared for bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that his presence had stirred more than just political intrigue. The Queen's gaze had hinted at deeper motives, and the handmaiden's fascination with him was both amusing and unnerving. Earth had sent him to secure an alliance, but already, the complexities of Altherian society were proving to be an unexpected challenge. He stared out the window of his quarters, where the Altherian skyline glittered like a field of stars. Somewhere out there, the Krell were advancing, their relentless hunger for conquest threatening everything humanity held dear. Ethan clenched his fists. Whatever it took, he would ensure Earth's survival. Little did he know, the events of the coming days would test not only his diplomacy but his courage, ingenuity, and perhaps even his heart. The Queen's favor. The early morning light filtered through the iridescent crystal walls of the Altherian palace, painting Ethan Cade's chambers in hues of gold and sapphire. He stood at the balcony, gazing out at the sprawling city below. Hovering platforms buzzed in the distance, carrying clusters of Altherians dressed in flowing robes, while silver towers spiraled into the sky, their tips catching the first rays of dawn. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to marvel at the alien beauty of the world around him, a stark contrast to the chaos Earth had endured under the shadow of the Krell threat. His thoughts were interrupted by a chime at his door. Before he could respond, it slid open with a soft hiss, revealing one of the Queen's attendants, Araya. Her tall figure and commanding presence filled the room, but her smirk suggested she was already plotting her next move in their peculiar rivalry. The Queen has summoned you, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She wishes to discuss the terms of Earth's request. Ethan adjusted the collar of his suit. I assume it's not going to be an easy negotiation. Araya tilted her head, a flicker of amusement in her multifaceted eyes. That depends. The Queen is not easily impressed, but you seem to have piqued her curiosity. Few outsiders do. Before Ethan could ask what she meant, another voice cut through the room. I'll escort him. Lisha appeared in the doorway, her tone cool and measured. The tension between the two handmaidens was palpable, their rivalry reignited by the simple task of guiding Ethan to the throne room. Ethan raised a hand, attempting to defuse the situation. Why don't we both go? I'd hate to cause another misunderstanding. The two women exchanged glances, and for a brief moment, it seemed like they might argue. But to Ethan's relief, Araya shrugged. Very well. Let's not keep the Queen waiting. An unexpected challenge. The throne hall was as grand as ever, the shimmering orbs casting their glow on Queen Ilyara as she regarded Ethan with her 6 piercing eyes. Surrounding her were the Altherian Council, a mix of advisors and generals, their expressions a blend of curiosity and skepticism. Ambassador Cade, the Queen began, her voice smooth and commanding, you speak of unity and survival, but words alone cannot forge an alliance. The Altherian Empire values action. Ethan nodded, prepared for this. What would you have me do, Your Majesty? The Queen's lips curved into a faint smile. A test of resolve. You will partake in our ceremonial trial of wits and endurance, a tradition reserved for those who seek to earn the favor of the Altherian throne. A murmur spread through the council, and even Araya and Lisha exchanged surprised looks. Ethan, however, stood firm. I'm honored, Your Majesty. What does the trial entail? The Queen gestured to a holographic projection that appeared in the center of the hall. It displayed an elaborate labyrinth, its walls shifting and shimmering like liquid silver. This is the labyrinth of Solaris. Within its depths lies a key. Retrieve it, and you will have proven your resourcefulness and adaptability, qualities you claim humanity excels at. Ethan studied the projection, his mind racing. It was clear the labyrinth wasn't just a test of navigation, its ever-shifting structure would demand quick thinking and creativity. I accept. The Queen nodded. You begin at dawn tomorrow. Prepare yourself, Ambassador. Rivalry in the shadows. As Ethan exited the throne hall, flanked by Araya and Lisha, the tension between the two handmaidens reached a breaking point. You shouldn't have agreed to this trial, Lisha said, her voice sharp. The labyrinth of Solaris is not designed for humans. Its environment is harsh, and its challenges are tailored to Altherian physiology. Araya smirked. You underestimate him. Humans are far more capable than they appear. Besides, she added with a sly glance at Ethan, he has the element of unpredictability on his side. Lisha rolled her eyes. Unpredictability is not a strategy. Ethan sighed, stopping in his tracks. Ladies, I appreciate your concern, but arguing about it won't help. If this trial is what it takes to secure Earth's survival, I'll face it, human physiology or not. Both women fell silent, their expressions softening ever so slightly. Araya spoke first. Then you'll need guidance. The labyrinth's walls respond to intent and emotion. Stay focused, or you'll lose your way. Lisha nodded reluctantly. And trust your instincts. Logic alone won't get you through. Ethan looked at both of them, surprised by the rare moment of agreement. Thanks. I'll keep that in mind. The labyrinth awaits. The next morning, Ethan stood at the entrance to the labyrinth of Solaris. The towering walls shimmered like molten silver, their surfaces alive with swirling patterns that shifted and twisted with every passing second. Behind him, a crowd of Altherians had gathered to watch, their expressions ranging from skeptical to intrigued. Queen Ilyara addressed the crowd from her elevated throne. Today, we witness whether this human, who speaks of unity and ingenuity, can prove himself worthy of our trust. Let the trial begin. The moment Ethan stepped inside, the labyrinth came alive. The walls shifted, closing off passages and opening new ones in a seemingly random pattern. The air was thick with a faint hum, as if the structure itself was testing him. He moved cautiously at first, studying the changes and trying to predict the labyrinth's rhythm. It wasn't long before he encountered his first obstacle, a series of floating platforms over a chasm that pulsed with an eerie blue light. The platforms flickered, their stability uncertain. Focus, he muttered to himself, recalling Araya's advice. He took a deep breath and leapt, his movements precise and deliberate. Each platform wobbled under his weight, but he pressed on, reaching the other side just as the final platform vanished into thin air. The turning point. Deeper into the labyrinth, Ethan faced increasingly complex challenges, puzzles that required creative thinking, corridors that seemed to twist back on themselves, and illusions that tested his resolve. Through it all, he relied on his adaptability and a growing sense of determination. Every step was a reminder of what was at stake, not just for him, but for Earth. Finally, after what felt like hours, he reached the heart of the labyrinth. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, atop which rested the key, a shimmering crystal that pulsed with a gentle glow. As he approached, the walls began to close in, the labyrinth's final test forcing him to act quickly. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed the key and sprinted toward the exit, the walls collapsing behind him. He emerged from the labyrinth just as the final passage sealed shut, clutching the key tightly in his hand. The crowd erupted in murmurs, and Queen Ilyara rose to her feet, her expression one of quiet approval. "You have succeeded, Ethan Cade," she announced. "Perhaps there is more to humanity than meets the eye." Ethan bowed, exhaustion etched across his face. "Thank you, Your Majesty." I hope this is just the beginning of what we can accomplish together. Secrets beneath the surface. The Altherian court erupted in applause as Ethan Cade emerged victorious from the labyrinth of Solaris. His heart raced with adrenaline, but there was something deeper that settled within him, a new sense of hope. He had passed the Queen's test, not just with ingenuity but with the strength of humanity's spirit. His victory was more than just a personal achievement, it was a victory for Earth and its survival in a galaxy that seemed to see humanity as nothing more than a blip on the radar. Queen Ilyara's 6 eyes glinted with interest as she nodded to her council. The human has proven his resilience and resourcefulness. His people may not have the strength of the Altherians, but their tenacity is undeniable. Her voice, smooth and controlled, resonated throughout the hall. The Altherian Empire will stand beside Earth in this war against the Krell. The crowd's murmurs faded into silence, their attention focused on Ethan, who stood at the center of the hall, still catching his breath. He glanced toward the Queen, his mind racing with the enormity of the moment. This was the moment that would change everything for Earth. The Alliance was now in motion, and he had earned the trust of the Altherians, but it wasn't the end of his journey. It was only the beginning. The Handmaiden's new role. As the court began to disperse, Ethan was approached by the Queen's handmaidens. Araya and Lisha stood before him, their expressions more guarded than before. It was clear that the rivalry between them had yet to reach its conclusion, but something had shifted in their demeanor. They were no longer just competitors, they had witnessed firsthand the strength and adaptability of humanity. "Well done," Araya said, her voice softer than it had been before. "You survived the labyrinth. I didn't think a human could do it." Ethan smiled, his exhaustion melting into a sense of camaraderie. "I didn't think so either, but sometimes you just have to trust your instincts." Lisha gave a brief nod. "You've earned their respect. And ours. There's more at stake than you know, Ambassador. The Krell are relentless, but so are we. If we're going to win this war, we need to fight as one." Ethan met her gaze, understanding the weight behind her words. The Altherians had their own history of war, but this wasn't just any war. The Krell weren't like the enemies the Altherians had faced before. Their tactics were brutal and unforgiving, and if humanity was going to stand a chance, they needed to learn how to work together. Araya spoke again, her tone more serious. "You will need more than diplomacy to unite our forces. The Altherian generals are a proud and stubborn group. They've never worked with outsiders. The Queen's favor is one thing, but you'll need to convince them to put aside their doubts." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." Unlikely alliances. Later that day, Ethan found himself in the Altherian War Council room, surrounded by the most powerful military minds in the Empire. The walls were adorned with holographic maps of star systems and alien fleets, the air thick with tension. The generals were seated at a long, obsidian table, their eyes scanning the various tactical plans laid before them. Queen Ilyara sat at the head of the table, her presence commanding every inch of the room. "This is Ambassador Cade," Queen Ilyara introduced him, her voice firm. "He represents humanity. He has proven his worth through the trial of Solaris, but it is now time to test his strategy." Ethan stood before the council, feeling a mixture of awe and trepidation. The general's eyes were cold, calculating, and skeptical. He knew that gaining their trust would be more challenging than anything he had faced before. The fate of Earth rested not only on the Alliance but on their willingness to accept humanity's unconventional methods. "Your Majesty, honored generals," Ethan began, his voice steady. "I know humanity does not have the luxury of time. The Krell will not wait for us to grow accustomed to one another. They are ruthless, and we must be smarter than they are if we are to survive." A stern general with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude spoke up. "Humanity's tactics are unconventional, Ambassador. You rely on surprise and adaptability rather than direct confrontation. We fight with strategy, precision, and overwhelming force. How can we trust that your people will stand with us in this war? Ethan didn't flinch. Because we've had to. Humanity has faced countless challenges, from natural disasters to oppressive regimes. We've learned to survive by thinking outside the box. The Krell won't expect us to act like them, they'll underestimate us, and that's where we'll find our advantage. The general narrowed his eyes. Bold words. But your people lack the experience in galactic warfare. How do you intend to change that? Ethan took a deep breath. I don't intend to fight like the Krell. I intend to fight smarter. We can create chaos, disrupt their plans before they even know what's happening. We'll attack their weak points and force them to adapt to us, not the other way around. The room was silent for a moment as the generals exchanged skeptical glances. But the Queen remained still, her eyes fixed on Ethan, and that gave him the courage to continue. If you allow humanity to contribute to your strategies, we can make a difference, he said, his voice resolute. We'll stand with you, not as pawns in your game, but as partners in this fight. For a long moment, no one spoke. Ethan could feel the weight of the council's judgment hanging in the air. Finally, Queen Ilyara spoke, her voice low and contemplative. You are bold, Ambassador. Perhaps there is something to this chaos of yours after all. She turned to the generals. We will give humanity a chance to prove their worth. Work with Ambassador Cade and his team. But remember, we do not have the luxury of failure. The rivalry continues. As Ethan left the council room, a sense of accomplishment filled him. He had convinced the Queen to give humanity a chance, but the real work was just beginning. The generals might have agreed to collaborate, but their skepticism would be difficult to overcome. Humanity's unconventional methods were a hard sell in a galaxy that valued precision and order. But as he walked through the palace corridors, something unexpected happened. Araya and Lisha approached him once again, their rivalry set aside for the moment. You've done it, Ambassador, Araya said, her voice tinged with respect. You've earned the trust of the council. Now comes the hard part, convincing them that you're more than just words. Lisha nodded. We've seen your potential. But you'll need more than ideas. You'll need to lead them into battle. Show them what humanity can really do. Ethan met their gaze, the weight of their words settling in his chest. I won't let you down. We'll fight together. The two handmaidens exchanged a brief look before Araya spoke again. Let's hope that's enough, Ambassador. For all our sakes. And with that, the rivalry between the two handmaidens was momentarily forgotten. Together, they would face the Krell, and perhaps, in the process, they would learn that the true strength of humanity lay not in its battles, but in its ability to unite against the odds. The price of unity. Ethan sat alone in his quarters, staring at the stars that stretched out before him. Through the translucent walls of his room, the vastness of the galaxy was visible, a canvas of glittering light, dotted with distant planets and swirling nebulae. The hum of the palace's energy systems provided a quiet backdrop, but in the stillness, Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The alliance was fragile, barely a few days old, and there was so much at stake. Earth's survival rested on his shoulders, but he knew that in the grand scheme of things, humanity was a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Would the Altherians truly stand with them when the time came? Would the galaxy's other species join forces against the Krell, or would fear drive them all into isolation? He rubbed his temples, trying to steady his thoughts. His mission was clear: unite the galaxy, protect Earth, and defeat the Krell. But with every passing hour, he realized just how much he had underestimated the complexity of this task. A shifting alliance. The following morning, Ethan was summoned to the Queen's chambers. The air was thick with anticipation as he walked down the long, crystalline halls, flanked by Araya and Lisha. They walked in silence, both of them deep in thought. Though their rivalry remained, there was a certain understanding between them now, an unspoken truce formed from the shared weight of their mission. The throne room was quieter than usual, and the tension in the air was palpable. Queen Ilyara stood before a holographic map, her 6 eyes scanning the various coordinates with quiet focus. The generals were absent today, leaving the Queen's inner circle to discuss more delicate matters. Ambassador Cade, the Queen's voice rang out, smooth and commanding. The Krell have launched a new offensive. They've advanced beyond the borders of Altherian space, and they've begun targeting our supply lines. Ethan's heart sank. The Krell were relentless, and this was exactly what he had feared, an aggressive push to weaken the galaxy's defenses before the full-scale war began. Your Majesty, Ethan started, but the Queen cut him off with a raised hand. I have no doubt that you are already planning a counterattack, she said, her voice tinged with a rare hint of concern. However, we must acknowledge the reality of the situation. The Krell are far more advanced than we anticipated, and our resources are stretched thin. We need more than just strategy. We need to find a way to unite the galaxy's fractured factions. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The Altherians were powerful, but they weren't invincible. If the rest of the galaxy didn't rally behind them, the Krell would crush everything in their path. I agree, Ethan said. I think humanity's role in this war should go beyond just fighting. We can help broker peace among the other factions, especially the ones on the edge of this war. If we can unite them, then we can stand a chance. The Queen's 6 eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of doubt in her expression. You believe the galaxy will trust Earth after everything we've seen? You speak of unity, but unity is not born from diplomacy alone. It is forged in blood and sacrifice. You may need to prove your people's strength in more ways than words. The room fell into a heavy silence. Ethan swallowed, the reality of the situation sinking in. This was no longer just about diplomacy, it was about survival. And sometimes survival came at a great cost. Rising tensions. Later that day, Ethan found himself at the War Council again, this time facing not just the Queen and her generals but the commanders of several other galactic factions, each representing a different species that had been brought into the fold after his successful labyrinth trial. Tensions were high as the representatives bickered over who should take the first step in fighting the Krell. One of the commanders, a tall and intimidating figure from the Felian species, slammed his fist on the table. The Altherians have the resources and the strength, yet they sit idly by while we fight the Krell on our borders. Humanity, what are you going to do about this? More empty promises. Ethan stood up, his voice calm but firm. We are all facing the same enemy. This is not about who leads the charge, it's about the survival of all of us. If we don't stand together, the Krell will destroy us one by one. The Felian commander sneered. I don't trust the humans. We've seen how your species behaves, unpredictable, emotional. You're not ready for this. Before Ethan could respond, Lisha, who had been standing near the door, stepped forward, her voice steady but sharp. You should trust Ambassador Cade, she said, addressing the commander directly. He has proven himself in the labyrinth, and now he's facing your petty accusations without flinching. Not many could do that. The commander shot a withering look at her but said nothing. The Queen remained silent, her eyes flicking between the commanders with quiet interest. Ethan could feel the pressure mounting, one wrong move and the fragile alliance could collapse. I will not let humanity be underestimated, he said finally, his voice ringing with authority. We have faced extinction before, and we have always come out on top. The Krell will not break us. The unlikely leader. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself at the center of an unlikely storm. The handmaidens, once a source of competition and intrigue, had become invaluable allies. Araya and Lisha had been assigned to accompany him on a crucial mission, to negotiate with one of the galaxy's most elusive factions, the Vargans. The Vargans were a species of highly intelligent but fiercely independent beings. They valued strength and honor above all else, and their loyalty was hard-won. Ethan and his team had been tasked with persuading them to join the alliance, a mission that had the potential to shift the balance of power in the war against the Krell. The Vargon emissary, a tall figure clad in battle-worn armor, looked down at Ethan with piercing eyes. "Why should we join your war, human? Your kind is weak. You lack the strength to face the Krell head-on." Ethan met his gaze, his mind racing. Strength is not always about physical power. It's about what you're willing to fight for. Humanity fights for each other. We fight for the future of our people, and for those who cannot defend themselves. The Krell prey on weakness, but we are not weak. The emissary studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched on, tense and heavy. Finally, the emissary spoke. "I will not pledge our forces today. But you have given me something to consider, human. Perhaps there is more to your kind than I thought." A turning point. As Ethan returned to the Altherian palace that evening, he felt a strange sense of resolve. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but he knew that humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer in question. It was up to him, and the alliances they had forged, to show the universe that they could not be ignored. And yet, a nagging feeling lingered at the back of his mind. He had seen the way the Vargans hesitated, the doubt in their eyes. Could Earth truly rise to meet the challenges ahead, or would the price of unity be too high? With every victory, the weight of the cost became more apparent. Shadows of the past. The quiet hum of the Altherian palace was a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Ethan Cade's mind. The weight of his recent successes, and the challenges still ahead, pressed down on him, making every breath feel like a calculated effort. He had earned the trust of several factions, each one a piece of the puzzle needed to defeat the Krell. But despite the alliances forming around him, a sense of unease lingered. As the days passed, Ethan began to understand the true cost of leadership. The promises of unity were easy to make, but the deeper they delved into galactic politics, the more apparent it became that trust was a fragile thing. Some of the factions, like the Felian, had agreed to join the alliance in theory, but their loyalty remained tentative at best. Each species had their own agenda, their own history, and that history was full of scars that would not heal easily. One evening, as Ethan walked through the winding corridors of the palace, he found himself in a quiet courtyard, alone with his thoughts. The stars above twinkled like distant beacons, but they offered little comfort. He could hear the faint echo of footsteps behind him, and when he turned, he saw Araya approaching. "You're becoming quite the figure around here, Ambassador," she said, her voice tinged with something resembling admiration. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, softened as she regarded him. "The generals are speaking of you with more respect. Even the Felian commander has begun to consider your methods." Ethan chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. "Respect doesn't win wars," he muttered. "Loyalty does. And that's something I have yet to earn. They don't trust us yet, not truly." Araya studied him for a moment. "You have to understand," she began, her tone uncharacteristically gentle, "the galaxy is full of old wounds. The Altherians, the Felian, the Vargans, we all carry the weight of history. And history has taught us not to trust easily. You are not just fighting the Krell. You're fighting a legacy of division." Ethan exhaled slowly, taking in her words. "And what am I supposed to do with that? I can't change the past. All I can do is keep moving forward." "Perhaps," Araya agreed, "but that doesn't mean you don't have to confront it. Unity isn't built on forgetting the past. It's built on understanding it." A ghost from the past. The next day, as Ethan attended a strategy session with Queen Ilyara and the generals, his mind wandered back to Araya's words. Unity wasn't about ignoring the past, it was about learning from it. But how could they overcome such deep-rooted animosity between the various factions? How could humanity hope to unite beings who had been in conflict for centuries? As the meeting began, Ethan's attention was drawn to a new arrival, a Vargon emissary, tall and imposing, wearing the traditional ceremonial armor of his species. He was accompanied by a small group of guards, all of them battle-hardened and wary. The Vargon emissary walked up to Ethan and gave him a slight nod. "Ambassador Cade," the Vargon said, his voice deep and gravelly. "I have come to speak of our alliance. You've convinced my people that humanity may indeed have something to offer, but we have conditions." Ethan straightened, bracing for the challenge ahead. "What conditions do you have, Vargon?" The emissary's eyes glinted with something dark, something personal. "You may think this war is about defeating the Krell. But to us, it is also about confronting the past." Ethan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" The Vargon's gaze never wavered. "The Krell are not our only enemies. There are those among us who have been responsible for atrocities in the past. The Krell came for us after we weakened ourselves with internal strife. This war, our involvement, is not just about survival. It is about redemption. If you want our full support, you will help us confront the ghosts of our history." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged with the weight of old grudges. Ethan understood now, the war against the Krell was only one part of the battle. There were old wounds, unresolved conflicts, and painful truths that still needed to be dealt with before any true unity could be forged. The trial of redemption. In the days that followed, Ethan worked tirelessly, not only with the military strategists but with diplomats from every faction involved in the alliance. The Vargans, in particular, were difficult to convince. They demanded a special tribunal, a public reckoning of their past crimes and atrocities that they believed had led to the Krell's brutal conquest. It was a bitter pill to swallow for many, but Ethan knew this was the only way forward. Unity was not just about victories on the battlefield, it was about healing the wounds that ran deep within the hearts of every species. The trial was set in the grand hall of the palace. The Vargon representatives arrived in full ceremonial garb, their faces set in grim lines. At the center of the room was a raised platform, where a holographic display flickered, showing images of battles long past, the bloodshed that had torn apart the Vargon Empire from within. The trial was not just for the Vargans, it was for all to see. Each faction, each representative, would be forced to confront their own sins and their own responsibility for the war that had ravaged the galaxy. It was a moment of reckoning, of painful truths brought to light, and Ethan knew that it was a necessary step if they were ever to stand united. As the trial began, Ethan stood at the back of the room, watching as each leader took the stage. Some spoke of their people's mistakes with humility, while others tried to deflect blame. The Vargans, however, spoke with raw honesty, recounting their civil wars, the betrayals that had fractured their unity, and the choices they had made that allowed the Krell to exploit their weakness. Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The galaxy was not just a battleground, it was a place of deep, unresolved pain. But in that pain lay the possibility of healing, if only they could find the courage to face it. The seeds of true unity. As the trial came to a close, Ethan stood before the assembly of species. His role was not to judge or condemn but to guide. He knew that the hardest part was yet to come. He had convinced the factions to confront their pasts, but now they would have to choose whether they could truly move forward together. "Now," Ethan said, his voice echoing through the hall, "we stand at a crossroads. The Krell are not just an enemy of one species, they are a threat to all of us. We've seen what happens when we allow our differences to divide us. But we've also seen what happens when we face the truth, no matter how painful. We have the opportunity to rise above the past and fight for something greater than ourselves." The room fell silent, and for a brief moment, there was hope in the air, hope that, perhaps, this time, they could unite. But as the voices of the various factions murmured around him, Ethan knew that the true test was not whether they could fight the Krell, but whether they could forgive each other and stand as one, despite the ghosts of their pasts. The heart of the storm. The tension on the bridge of the Altherian flagship was palpable. Ethan Cade stood at the command center, his eyes scanning the holographic displays that flickered in front of him. The Alliance fleet had gathered, each ship a beacon of the fragile unity between countless species. They were about to make a stand, one final push against the Krell. But despite the strength of the fleet, something gnawed at Ethan. The ghosts of the past, the unresolved tensions between the factions, still lingered in the background, waiting to unravel everything. "Ambassador Cade," said Araya, her voice cutting through his thoughts. She stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the dark expanse of space outside the viewport. "The Vargans are ready. They've committed their full fleet, despite the unrest among their own people. This could be our chance to turn the tide." Ethan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He had seen the fear and hesitation in the eyes of the fleet commanders. Despite their outward confidence, they were all still grappling with their histories. The Vargans, the Felian, the Altherians, they all carried scars that would never fully heal. The question wasn't whether they could defeat the Krell, it was whether they could trust each other long enough to succeed. "Have you spoken to the Vargon commander?" Ethan asked, his voice thoughtful. Araya glanced at him, a flicker of concern passing over her features. "Yes. He's more resolved than before, but there's a hard edge to his words. I don't think he's convinced that the Alliance can hold together once the battle begins." Ethan exhaled slowly, turning away from the view. "None of us are convinced yet. Not completely. A last chance for unity." The ship's alarms blared as the fleet jumped into the system, each vessel descending upon the Krell stronghold with terrifying speed. The coordinates were set, the plan was in motion. But even as the fleet engaged, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Krell weren't the only enemy here. He moved swiftly through the corridors of the flagship, his mind set on one goal: speak with the commanders one last time. The War Council had been tense, but now that the battle was imminent, it was time to solidify the resolve of the leaders who would determine the fate of the galaxy. Entering the war room, Ethan was met with a quiet buzz of voices. The generals of the Altherian, Felian, and Vargon fleets stood around a large holographic table, analyzing the incoming Krell forces. The display showed the Krell fleet forming up around a massive, heavily fortified space station, an energy disruptor that could cripple the entire Alliance fleet if it wasn't neutralized. Ambassador Cade, General Varric, a tall Felian with silver-tipped armor, turned toward him, his tone guarded but respectful. "Your people are in position. You've secured the rear flank, as requested. But we need your confirmation. Will humanity hold the line?" Ethan looked over the assembled leaders. The weight of their gazes settled heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just a battle of tactics, it was a battle of trust. If humanity faltered here, the entire Alliance could unravel. It was a sobering thought. "We will hold," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "But we won't win by fighting alone. We need every ship in the fleet, every faction united. If we fail to trust one another now, the Krell will destroy us all." A tense silence followed his words, and for a brief moment, Ethan wondered if he had said too much. But then, a surprising voice spoke up. It was the Vargon emissary, Commander Theric, stepping forward with a grim resolve in his eyes. "We fight not just to survive," he said, his deep voice reverberating through the room. "But to redeem ourselves. The Krell are but a symptom of the weakness that has plagued us. If we do not stand together, we will fall, and the galaxy will burn." The room was quiet, the truth of his words hanging in the air. Ethan knew that the real battle wasn't just on the battlefield. It was about overcoming the divisions of the past, trusting each other enough to fight side by side. The battle for the future. Moments later, the Alliance fleet surged forward, an imposing wall of ships speeding toward the Krell's fortress. The enemy was waiting, their ships positioned to create a deadly blockade. The battle had begun. Ethan stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes locked onto the screens in front of him. The distant stars flickered as the two fleets collided, ships firing relentlessly. But it wasn't just the energy blasts that made the air electric, it was the weight of history. The Vargans and Felians, Altherians and humans, all fought together, knowing that this battle wasn't just for survival. It was for the future of the galaxy. "We're taking heavy fire," a crew member called out, her voice tense. "Shields are holding, but barely." Ethan clenched his fists, feeling the heat of the moment. He turned to Araya, who was standing by the communications console, her eyes focused on the chaos unfolding outside. "We need to get to the disruptor," Ethan said, his voice sharp. "If we can disable their weapons, we can shift the tide." Araya nodded, immediately relaying the orders to the fleet. "All ships, concentrate fire on the disruptor station. We have one shot at this." The battle raged on around them, but Ethan's mind was clear. He knew what had to be done, and there was no turning back now. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the Vargan and Felian ships break through the Krell blockade, opening the way for humanity's ships to advance. A turning point. As the fleet closed in on the Krell station, Ethan's comms system crackled to life. It was a transmission from the Vargan commander. "We've made it inside the station," Tharic's voice was low, filled with resolve. "But the disruptor's core is heavily guarded. We need backup, now." Ethan didn't hesitate. "We're coming," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Prepare for support fire, don't let them fall." The bridge erupted into action as Ethan and Araya coordinated with the fleet, directing support fire to clear the path for Tharic's team. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as the Alliance pressed forward, the weight of the battle closing in on them. With every strike, every tactical decision, it became clear that their fate, humanity's fate, was tied to the success of this mission. Suddenly, the comms crackled again, and this time, it was Tharic's voice that came through, strong and filled with urgency. "Disruptor is offline. We did it, Ambassador. The Krell fleet is collapsing." A cheer erupted on the bridge, but Ethan couldn't allow himself to celebrate. The battle wasn't over yet, but it was a victory that would prove to the galaxy that humanity had a place among the stars. Not just as survivors, but as partners in a future they could build together. Aftermath. The quiet after the storm was deafening. The battle was won, but Ethan could feel the weight of the price. Many ships were lost, many lives sacrificed. The debris of battle floated in space, a testament to the chaos that had almost torn the Alliance apart. But as the fleet regrouped, a sense of unity began to settle in. Humanity, the Vargans, the Felians, the Altherians, all had fought together. Their differences hadn't torn them apart, they had forged something new, a bond born from the fires of battle. Ethan stood on the bridge, staring out at the aftermath. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. He had seen what it took to unite the galaxy: courage, trust, and the willingness to confront the darkest parts of their histories. And now, with the Krell in retreat, they had a chance to build something new. A chance to create a galaxy where unity wasn't just a dream, but a reality. The dawn of a new era. The battle had raged for hours, and the silent aftermath was both a relief and a heavy burden. The Alliance had emerged victorious, but the cost had been high. Ethan Cade stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as the final remnants of the Krell fleet retreated into the void. Their disruptor had been destroyed, their command ship crippled, but the victory felt hollow. Too many lives had been lost to truly celebrate. Yet, despite the cost, something had changed. The galaxy, once fractured and full of distrust, was beginning to heal. The factions that had fought beside humanity had seen the strength and resilience of Earth, and Ethan knew that this victory marked the beginning of something far greater than a mere alliance. It was the dawn of a new era, one where unity and collaboration might just be the key to survival in a galaxy that had long been defined by division. Ambassador Cade, Araya's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had come to stand beside him, her usual confident expression softened by the gravity of the moment. "We've done it. The Krell are retreating, and the fleet is regrouping." Ethan turned toward her, his face weary but resolute. "We've won, but the war is far from over. We've bought ourselves time, but we still need to solidify this alliance. We need to make sure it lasts." Araya's gaze softened, and for a moment, she looked at him not as a diplomat or a strategist, but as a fellow soldier. "You're right. This is just the beginning." The gathering of the leaders. Back at the Altherian capital, a historic summit was called. Representatives from every faction involved in the alliance, Vargon, Felian, Altherian, and Human, gathered in the Grand Hall to discuss the next steps. The Queen herself presided over the proceedings, her 6 eyes gleaming with a quiet understanding of the gravity of the moment. Ethan stood at the center of the room, flanked by Araya and Lisha, his mind focused on the task ahead. The Krell had been pushed back, but now, they would need to face the more difficult challenge of ensuring that their alliance would hold strong. "You've earned the respect of these people, Ambassador," Queen Ilyara said, her voice commanding yet filled with something rare, admiration. "But respect is not enough. You must now prove that this alliance is more than a temporary pact. It must be a bond that survives even the harshest trials." Ethan nodded, acknowledging the Queen's words. "I understand, Your Majesty. But unity isn't something that can be forged through a single victory. It's something we'll have to nurture over time. If we are to stand together in the face of future challenges, we need to trust each other, and trust takes time." The room was quiet as the various leaders exchanged looks. The Felian commander, tall and imposing, leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "You speak of trust, Human. But trust is not easily earned. There are factions among us that have long memories. Many have not forgotten the past." Ethan's gaze was steady. "I don't expect you to forget the past. But we have to learn from it, not let it dictate our future. The Krell are a greater threat than any of us could have imagined. If we fight among ourselves now, we'll be giving them exactly what they want." The Vargon emissary, Commander Theric, nodded in agreement. "The Human is correct. The Krell feed on division. If we are to stand a chance, we must rise above our differences. The first steps toward unity." The meeting stretched on for hours, with passionate debates and heated exchanges. Each faction had their own grievances, their own fears. But slowly, piece by piece, they began to forge a new understanding. The Vargans, once the most reluctant to trust humanity, now stood as one of the strongest supporters of the alliance. The Felian, known for their pride and stubbornness, began to soften their stance, recognizing the value of human unpredictability in battle. As the discussions progressed, Ethan found himself at the center of it all. He had become not just a symbol of Earth's strength, but a mediator between the various factions, a bridge between worlds, between histories, and between hearts. It was a role he had never asked for, but one he had come to accept. When the meeting finally concluded, the leaders had come to a consensus. The alliance was no longer a temporary alliance, it was the foundation of something new. A galactic coalition, built not just on military might, but on cooperation, trust, and the willingness to move forward together. "We have agreed," Queen Ilyara announced, her voice resonating with authority, "to form a galactic coalition. This is not just a military pact. This is a new beginning for all of us. We will stand together against the Krell, and we will stand together to build a future for all the peoples of the galaxy." The room erupted in applause, the weight of their decision settling in. For the first time in a long time, the leaders of the galaxy were united not by force, but by the shared understanding that their survival depended on each other.